Hey everybody, welcome to For the Singers. I'm Mel Toy, I'm a vocal coach from London, and joining me today is Cahal Jack, who is a vocal coach over in Ireland. How you doing, Cahal?
I'm waking up. Good morning.
I'm wide awake. Okay, so today the conversation that we're having is one that's like integral. It's something we talk about all the time as singers, but it's not necessarily something that we talk about in depth or with any kind of usefulness or application. We're just kind of told to do it and then expected to know what to do, and that's practicing. But not just any kind of practicing, but rather effective practicing. So that's the conversation that we're having today. Now, I don't know about you, Cahal, but like for me, this was a bit of an anomaly for a long time as a singer, because maybe I'd be given some exercises from my teacher that I would be told to do, or I'd have some songs that I had to work on. Maybe I had a concert coming up or whatever. And I just remember kind of going through the motions at home, but not going through them mentally, not really understanding, certainly not having any kind of self-awareness around practice, but rather just kind of doing the thing aimlessly. And I mean, like there would have been some kind of growth or development that would have been happening at the time, but as a vocal coach now, reflecting on it, certainly not the level of development that could have been happening had I known the purpose of what I was doing. Do you have any sort of reflections or experiences like that yourself?
Totally. When we started thinking about this as a topic, I kind of realized that it's something that as a vocal coach I ask and frankly I expect my clients to do all the time. It's something that I expect of myself to do with what I'm working on at a given time as well. But after that I realized I'm kind of only benignly engaged with it, other than blindly apparently repeating something that I've done before. And I think the realization in that was, I would often advise my clients to practice, for instance, if they have a trip in the car. It's a good way to use their time, which I still think is true, but it's more about the headspace. And rather than it being doing something, whilst we may be, I don't know, dusting the house or something with our headphones on.
Guilty. It's so guilty.
How much more actively do we really need to engage with it? And a thought that occurred to me is especially in the last few years, I think, as there has been more and more of a conversation about the benefits of movement while vocalizing, that we can often practice just sitting down and sitting still, but I think mentally we can kind of practice in our head sitting down and sitting still as well, where if we're more engaged actively with what we're doing, surely I think we get much more quality out of it.
Yeah, and I would go a step further to say that we shouldn't be practicing sitting down, just to play devil's advocate. I mean, okay, maybe a little bit different if you are a folk singer-songwriter and you perform all of your music with a guitar sitting on a stool, but then maybe you could, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that you want to be replicating the performance environment. So if you're a performer who is on your feet and you're energizing the crowd, or you're standing and playing, or you're whatever you're doing, you should be actively going through those motions when you're practicing as well. And in that way you're building in those patterns into your performance, rather than going for this kind of like sat, maybe hunched over, so potentially not the greatest and most accessible posture for efficiency, and then also just kind of lacking energy.
Which makes me wonder then, is the traditional experience of a singer in a voice training session that, they come in, they warm up, then they vocalize, then they sing. I wonder what about turning that on its head? As long as we do no harm, but sing, get into that space, get into that energy, and then vocalize.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's like every part of my insides goes no, but it's the other way around. But yeah, no, you're right. And also, I mean, like, this is a rabbit hole for another day, perhaps. But it's so essential if we're talking about practicing that we are actually practicing songs. It's so tempting to become hyper focused on technique, and that's not to say that we shouldn't be practicing technique. Of course we should. Technique is the fundamental of what we do. It allows us to have free expression, but we have to be expressing with our free expression. And if every time we go to practice we're literally doing a half-hour set of technical exercises, then we're not engaging with the thing that we want to do in the first place.
I agree.
with your songs.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
I totally agree. And, you know, to the voice coaches listening, you'll all know this. Those who may not be, this is something voice coaches do when they get together. They talk about classes with other voice coaches. And I was always struck by hearing a story about a very, very well-known and much celebrated vocal coach whose style was very much, do you feel like singing now? Can you sing? And if the answer was yes, right, let's sing. In other words, get straight into song.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So, okay, so then so now let's like backtrack, and I'm going to be little Mel. I'm trying to think of what age this memory is, and your age I think is quite young, but let's just say I'm like 13, 14, but I actually think my memory of practicing goes back to before that, to like 8 or 9 or something. But let's say I'm like 13, 14, and I'm just kind of getting started, and I'm wanting to build up a solid practice routine that I want to take forward into the future. So there are a few things we want to have here. We want to have something that's achievable. We want to have something that's enjoyable, so it shouldn't feel like work. If it feels like work, then we're doing something wrong. You know, we're in the arts. We're in the arts for a reason. We're in the arts because it makes us feel excited and passionate.
I
and
half agree with that. It should be enjoyable, but also I think it should. You know, as a vocal coach, there are just times where the voice needs that little bit of tough love, and I feel at that point, you know, it's incumbent upon me to sell why it's worth their while to do something that may not be so enjoyable at that moment.
Yeah, what sort of thing are you thinking about? What sort of thing are you thinking about?
For every singer, it will be different. But to give an example, you know, if you have a singer who really has a huge amount of tension while they sing, they'll want to sing songs, but you're going to need to get to the root of that to free them up first.
That's true.
So is practice always enjoyable? I'll stick my neck out and be honest. I don't think it is. But at least if we are, you know, not little Mel, who's 13 or 14 maybe, and while I'm sure she was very mature at that age, I think the older we get, like as adults, in other words, we understand that sometimes we just have to do things that are laborious and that are not much fun, but that functionally they are worth doing. But it's incumbent upon us, the voice coaches, to qualify why that's the case, and if you like, to sell it to them.
Yeah, but also there's something else that you said there. Oh, crads! What was it you said? It needs to be useful from the perspective of development and growth, but oh yeah, that's what you said. Mindset. Like, it's about mindset, right? Because even stuff that's laborious can be enjoyable if your mindset's in the right place, right? So if your focus is on the long-term outcome of what you're doing, but it comes back to that idea of understanding why. So, which is part of the enjoyability. So it needs to be effective. It needs to be engaging. Let's say engaging instead of enjoyable. Yeah. And we need to understand why we're doing it, because that was part of the problem, right? Back in the day, I didn't know why I was doing these scales. I was just doing them, but like, why? And what was that actually doing for my voice? And then as singers, if you're finding that you're not understanding that, please ask your coach why they're recommending what they're recommending to you.
This is true, which I think again is a good reason to always emphasize there is no such thing as a stupid question kind of ethos in any encounter that I think someone has training. And I'm always very conscious with the client who has never had voice training before to, for instance, even if it would be really helpful, I don't think I'm going to ask them to try straw phonation on the first day, because I think it's just going to be a little bit too strange, a little bit too off the wall, despite the fact that it may well be a really helpful thing to do. It is incumbent upon your vocal coach at all times to qualify why you are doing what you're doing, to reinforce why it is worthwhile, and to always make sure that you have a perspective about why you're doing what you're doing. And also what I like, especially working with clients that I have long term, is to have a song or a phrase as a reference, where having done it in the past and then repeated it may be in 2 weeks' time, it may be in 2 months' time, to be able to understand its quality in the here and now versus its quality in the past as a barometer of their progress, as a measure of how their voice has come along.
That's a good idea. So what do you get them to do then? Do they keep a copy of it, like video recording of it somewhere, an audio recording of it somewhere? What do you get them to do?
They I think mostly will always hang on to their recordings. So there is that. I think if you spend a few minutes or a part of a session working on a phrase, which, I mean, let's face it, if we're working with a vocal coach on a song, it tends, if there's something that's given us trouble, it tends to be one or two phrases in the song, usually. If it's anything other than that, you know, there's a bigger job going on. They'll remember, I find. Mm-hmm. This is a practice I've had for years. So I find we don't need to go back to a recording. They'll remember. And quite honestly, actually, usually, honestly, I remember as well.
Yeah.
It sticks in your head. I don't know why.
It does.
I wish people's names stuck with the same frequency. But anyway.
Or their faces.
Faces, I never forget. It's just a name. You're blankly staring at someone I know you from. I think, especially performers, you know, where we move around and you meet people, and people will know you as the person that was performing, and you meet them maybe somewhere that you don't. What's always mad is meeting someone where you don't normally see them, and you see them, but they're in a different location. It's like, I know you from where? So I got over myself years ago. I don't pretend that I remember their name. I should say, I'm really sorry. What's your name again?
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, my favorite was. Yeah, we have. But one more thing on this topic though. Like coming off Zoom and suddenly you realize people have legs. That was quite exciting. Anyway, by the way, people, you probably think I'm really tall. I got that a lot coming off Zoom. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're actually a lot shorter than you look on Zoom." I'm like, "Thanks." I don't know what to do with it, but thank you.
Yeah, because you know you look so big on the phone.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, let's just bring it back a bit. So we've kind of named a few things that it needs to be. I think also we need to just briefly say that we need a level of self-awareness, and we touched on this before around this idea of not distracting yourself by driving or not distracting yourself by cleaning. And like, I'm a fidgeter. When I practice, I really struggle to stand still. So in the past, and I'm certainly trying to correct this now, you would always know when I'd been practicing because my room would be spotless after I've been practicing, because I practice and I fiddle. But actually what we should be doing is putting those movements more into movements. If you're a person who has to fidget or has to move while you're practicing, then putting those movements into more practice directed movements and performance directed movements, and also thinking about staying engaged emotionally with the songs. So when you're doing technical exercises, focusing on those internal sensations. What does this feel like? What does it feel like if I change this? Where does it feel more effortless? And then you can always obviously take recordings and then compare the sound of your voice at those different points. You might even, as you go through, just say to the recording, that was a 6 out of 10 for effortless level on that take. I'm going to try again. And then you've got like a little document of yourself that kind of communicates your experience whilst also communicating the oral sound that's a little different than when you hear it yourself as a singer. And then when you're getting onto the song, being aware of being in the song in the way that you would be if you were performing it. So if you want to perform a song with a lot of emotion, then you need to be practicing a song with a lot of emotion and trying, if you can, to go the whole way through a song before stopping and going back and correcting things. Because if we can routinely stop halfway through a song to fix stuff, guess what we will do when we perform? Or it's not causation necessarily, but the likelihood of us stopping on our way through increases. So we're better to just not practice that behavior at all.
What about, as we're talking here, I think we're probably in our minds focusing more on technique, practicing connecting with what you're singing is a skill all of its own as well.
Absolutely. So like building that story, who are you talking to? Where are you? If you're, maybe going into this as a conversation for another day, but just to put it into perspective, having a conversation like this over Zoom is very different to having a conversation in a noisy bar or having a conversation, I don't know, somewhere drastic like a morgue. Just for the sake of comparison.
Well, morticians have to practice too.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's natural reverb in those kind of rooms as well.
I bet the reverb in a morgue is actually amazing. I can't believe we've gone there, but I bet the reverb in a morgue is fantastic. All that bouncy silver stuff. Yeah,
exactly. So morticians are welcome to sing as well. Yeah, it's I think I keep coming back to what for me has been a real revelation, this emphasis on movement and how productive that is, to do the same, to have the same dynamic engagement as we practice. Practice will, I think by its very nature, if we're honest, there are times where it'll feel like a chore. There will times where it feels like, okay, if I'm to make this investment in my voice worthwhile, and if I'm to protect my voice, I do need to do these things. So there are times where I think it feels like a chore, but it's important that even while we may do that, that we, in order to get the best out of it, are fully engaged with it on all levels. So I suppose if we were to distill this into a thought, what would it be?
I guess being present, isn't it? Being present presence when practicing. Maybe that should be the title of today's episode.
I think you nailed it. Excellent.
Okay, cool. So let's wrap this up for today. I think this is a topic that we could obviously keep talking about for an eternity, and I know that my mind is buzzing with some other ideas, so we might have to do that. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey with us today, into our thoughts, our ramblings even on practicing and what we should be thinking about doing, engaging with.
I would add as well, don't be afraid to offer any ideas, any thoughts, in the comments below.
Please do. We would love to hear from you. Thanks so much, guys. All the best.